Should the president be elected without the majority of the vote? Join us today as we talk about majority versus plurality. Yeah. Hey guys, welcome back to the Mr. R Show. As always, we are your hosts. I am Andy.
I'm Ashton.
And today we're talking about kind of a versus series, sort of. We define some things and just talk about it. Today is majority versus plurality, like the intro suggested. So let's just, before we begin, let's just get the definitions of what each system is, right? When you think of voting, you usually think the most votes wins, right? But there's two ways this could happen. You can either A, have the majority of the votes, which is when a candidate has over 50% of the total voting.
By one vote.
Even if it's, like Ashton said, even if it's one vote, if they have the majority, more than 50% or more, they have the majority of the vote. Plurality does not work the same way. You can win the presidency while not having the majority of the vote. What plurality means is out of all the votes counted, let's say, hypothetically, there's three presidents, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and let's say Donald Trump, right? You could have one getting 44%, one getting 43%, and one getting 20-something percent, and that 44% president wins. They do not have the majority of the votes. They have what is called a plurality, having the most, but still under half of all the votes counted. Mm-hmm. Luckily, in the United States specifically, we haven't had too many cases where the majority doesn't win out. Usually, it's always the majority of votes. That's who wins the presidency. One time has the Electoral College not won a majority, and that was with John Quincy Adams back. He had 32% of the vote, historically low. He actually got chosen by the House of Representatives. So this was a different time, though. 1800 was different. This probably would not go down the same today, and if it did, it would be, if you kind of look at season 4 of House of Cards, you kind of see what would happen there. Mm-hmm. And then only 5 times has the president not gotten the majority of the popular vote and still won the presidency. You have as recently as Donald Trump in 2016, you have George W. Bush, Benjamin Harrison, Rutherford B. Hayes, and of course, John Quincy Adams, as I mentioned before. Just to emphasize on the point of just Trump actually had over 2 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton did in 2016, yet still won the election. So this is when it raises the questions, Ashton. Before you can, I'll let you answer and kind of comment too, of should the president of the United States be elected without receiving a majority of the vote?
So just to not confuse people, the Electoral College is the mechanism that the founders decided to choose in order to elect a president. They have to vote. When you're voting on election day, you're not actually voting for president. You're voting for electors that elect the president, so to say. So just to make this clear, you need a majority of the Electoral College. But that also means every state has to choose, or gets to decide a way of choosing those electors. And they typically are done for 48 states, winner takes all. Mm-hmm. So when you do a system like that, eventually you can have some weird outcomes. And sometimes if you get the most votes, let's say you win California by extra million, but you lose Pennsylvania, Michigan by 15,000. That's where you start getting that plurality starts to take effect, and you can win with the plurality because you get a majority in the Electoral College. So just to clear up things. Now, where do I stand? I'm someone where I think it's a legitimate debate because both have their downfalls and their upsides. And I think it's one of those things where we're going to be debating this for a long time. And eventually, I do think we're going to go to a kind of popular vote method of electing a president. But personally, I prefer the Electoral College. I believe the Electoral College is there to balance out the power of the cities and the power of the kind of farmland, the rural community. And it allows you to have diverse states make the choice, because you can have the cities decide, a state like New York, where New York City is deciding where those electoral college votes go. And in Pennsylvania, you can have the rural parts of the state choose where their electoral college points go. If you just have popular vote, you necessarily don't ever get that. And so you need, the founders wanted this kind of dichotomy where you're always trying to have the rural, which inherently doesn't have as much population, have some power. It's the reason why we have a Senate and a House. We don't just do stuff by population in this country, and there's a good reason for that. Now, it doesn't end up fair sometimes, I will admit that, but it's meant to balance out the power, whether you like that balance or not. And if you lived in the rural parts, you would feel like you want some power as much as someone in New York City.
I'm not going to get too much specifically on the Electoral College and what it is and all the history behind it. That's another video for another day. My stance on just should the president be elected if they don't receive the majority. To me, I do not like the Electoral College. I know me and you have talked about it before this video, and you know my stance. I don't like it. I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to go huge into it. If you want us to do a video, maybe comment below, hit the like button. But if you want to see a great video on just why the Electoral College just isn't the best, I will link it in the description. He is an amazing YouTuber, Mr. Beat. I know you watch him, Ashton. I love his
Mm-hmm.
videos. He talks about why he doesn't like the Electoral College. Go check that video out. That's pretty much my viewpoints in a nutshell. Not all of them, but pretty much well done. I understand what you're saying, and that's a valid point too. But to me, there is an alternative system that can fix the problems of both Electoral College people that despise it and people that just want it to be popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's called an alternative voting method called ranked choice voting, or just RCV, whatever is easier for you to say. And basically what it is, the definition is any election using systems in which voters use a ranked ballot to rank choices in a sequence on the ordinal scale, first, second, third, fourth, etc., stuff like that. Now, not many states use this today. Only
Mm-hmm.
26 states use RCV in some form or fashion, and only one state, Maine, uses it across the board for all
Mm-hmm.
elections. So it's not very used, not common, and will take time for this to be implemented. It's not an instant fix. It will take years upon years to implement throughout the US. Why I like it, and just to describe it in a nutshell, is instead of having really only two choices of the election day, because you hear when you vote third party, that's a vote for Trump, or that's a vote for Clinton, or that's a vote for Biden, just kind of a waste of vote. I know,
Well,
Ashton, you can.
so instead of just getting one vote, you get to list out your opinions in a row, and if your first one, let's say, only gets 2% of the vote, and no one gets a majority, then whoever you pick second, your vote isn't necessarily wasted. It goes to that second choice.
Yes. So, like, again, three presidents. If none of them get more than three, more than one, or like more than the other in the votes, the majority, they then go to the second pick. Who has the most second picks or the most third, and they keep going, and somebody will win the majority of the vote. It will. They can never. You can never win a plurality in ranked choice voting. It is always the majority. If you want a good example, go look at Maine and their elections. Have been a lot. A lot of people in Maine are liking the system. There
Mm-hmm.
are some positives and some negatives. I'll get into that. Some of the positives would, we would never have a president, like I said, that would be elected by having fewer than half the vote. So plurality never occurs, it's only a majority. Another positive is third parties now have a chance to grow. Now, not necessarily are they going to win. I still don't think they can be strong enough at the get-go to win. But they now have more of a voice. Instead of only getting 2 or 3% of the national vote, they can get 20% of the vote. I mean, that's a rare occasion. We haven't had that since the 90s with the Reform Party. And, so third parties can have more of a voice, and which comes with the territory of third parties. We get more choices for president. It's not just really Republican or Democrat. You have more choices and gives more voices. Ashton, do you see any more positives, or do you want to disagree with any of those points?
So we're practically saying, or you are practically saying, you feel like it's a alternative that's better.
I have some negatives, and I'll get to my opinion on that in a second. But I liked ranked choice voting.
I'll go over negatives because I generally for ranked choice voting, I like it for primaries. I feel like it should be a system that should be used for primaries. It's very oriented towards the primary process, having lots of candidates, having multiple levels of issuing your opinion, basically. For the presidential, I do not like it at all. Ranked choice voting, in my opinion, president, you only are picking one. You're not ordering who you want in order. You're picking one. And ultimately, if you're saying, well, third parties would have more of a opinion or voice, I don't necessarily agree with that because if you look at it this way, third parties, their issue hasn't been the mechanism of voting because they would have been very successful in 92. Their problem in that election, and since they haven't been taking themselves seriously. I mean, the only one to take themselves somewhat seriously was Gary Johnson in 2016. And look, he had the most success because he actually somewhat took himself seriously. But since then, I mean, you had the Libertarians nominating a literal comedian to their VP nomination. People don't take a lot of third parties seriously because they are niche parties. They don't try to appeal to a massive group of voters. And I don't necessarily switching it to ranked choice voting will change that. You might have a little bit more people placing you first just because they don't like the general nominee. But at the end, a lot of people won't even understand the first ballot implications of that. At the end, they're going to just look at the results, and they won't see any or third party candidates getting any percentage of the final results, right? Because a lot of people are very simplistic. So think of it this way. At the end of the day, if you have let's say in Maine, the Senate candidates at the end of 2020, you have Sarah Gideon getting 48%, you have the incumbent getting 47, and the Green candidate getting 5%. That Green candidate gets cut off, right? And then it gets reallocated. At the end of the day, the only thing they're going to see is they're going to see, let's say, Sarah Gideon with 51% and the incumbent with 49%. They're going to be like, oh, the third party didn't get a single vote. I'm just saying, I'm going to the point where a lot of voters don't have that complexity of knowledge to understand that there's two different ballots. There's the reallocated one where you give the second and third choice voters or votes to whoever's first or second and see who gets that majority. And then there's the initial votes. That 5% for the independent part, a Green candidate, you don't know. The most voters won't look at that initial ballot. They won't care. All they will look is see Fox News be projection after RCP or the RCVs are reallocated. They're going to see Democrat 51, Republican incumbent 49, and they're going to be like, oh, okay, third party didn't get any because they are inherently not going to be in the top two spots to get stuff reallocated.
I do think that you want to oversimplify the election to, I guess, just pander to people that don't understand as much. I'm trying, in my opinion, is I understand that most people don't understand voting to the way they should. They don't know how this country is run like they should, and they don't even know the Constitution like they should. I understand that, and that's why we have the election we have. It's really just you have two choices, pick. Most of the time, they aren't what people want. You look, like I said, if you want to limit RCV to just the primaries, that's a start. I'm fine with that, but I think eventually we can get to the presidency. Another thing you pointed out in your response was that Gary Johnson had, and with your words, success in 2016. I don't define success with only 3% of the national vote. 3% of the vote is not, to me, is a success. So it doesn't matter how seriously they've taken themselves, so they can only get 3 to 4% of the vote every year. That is my issue, and I'm fine. I understand, but I think that having more options are always a good thing than having fewer options.
I mean, we can debate it all days. I do feel like third parties deserve ability to voice their issues and stuff like that. But like I said, most third parties are very niche. You have the same issue in like Canada, where a lot of the third parties are literally just there for niche issues and they don't try to appeal to a broader base of Americans. I feel like libertarians are the closest thing America has to a third party, and they hadn't taken themselves seriously until Gary Johnson. And you may say, oh, that's not success. That's the highest amount of votes or vote percentage they have ever gotten, ever. And again, in 1992, when you hadn't had a serious third party contender in over 40 years, you finally get one with Ross Perot, and he found a lot of success. He was even leading in polls before he dropped out. And you know why Americans didn't vote for Ross Perot as much as they were planning on to? Because he dropped out and then got back in. And voters won't take you seriously if you do that. And that's the issue if we're talking about third parties. But get back on issue or on topic, RCV. I think it's a good idea. I feel like if you want it to work and Americans to understand it, you need to put it in primaries. But there's something like mail-in voting we've had since the Civil War, and majority Americans don't even understand the difference between absentee and mail-in voting. And guess what? There's almost no difference. That's the problem. People would be like, "Oh, what's there?" There's not any difference, and you have people taking advantage of that misinformation and the lack of understanding of that and buying into fear mongering. And so it's one of those things where RCV, I just think it's a little bit too complex for the American public at this point. Maybe we could teach the American public that it's a good alternative, but
Yeah.
I just don't feel right now it's the best choice for president.
I get what you're saying. Complexity is always a problem. You know, the American people, they don't like things they don't understand. It's just the truth. They always.
Patrick.
That's why we have conspiracy theories and conspiracy cults, because like they just can't understand that sometimes there is no explanation. But like if we have to settle for ranked choice voting just to be in the primaries to start it off, I'm perfectly fine with that. I think it has to start with primaries in all 50 states for it to even be viable for presidency,
Mm.
but we will see it as it comes. But guys, thank you for joining us today as we just talked about plurality versus majority, our thoughts on, ranked choice voting and everything in between. We hope you guys stay safe. We'll be back next Friday again. It is going to be our August election map predictions, so that's always fun. Tune in for that, and we'll see you guys next time.